The Ohio State Buckeyes will win the 2016 College Football Playoff National Championship. Why? We have the best coach in the country. We have a proven winner at quarterback, and our defense is loaded with hitters and ball hawks that can give us a boost whenever we need it. Now, in my little rambling about Ohio State football, you may have noticed I used the pronouns we, us, and our. And you may not have. If you didn't, that's because it's normal for sports fans to use these pronouns when they talk about their favorite teams. These pronouns are labeled as first person plural pronouns, or as I would refer to them as inclusive grammar. Now, I don't play for Ohio State, sadly, but I didn't hesitate to use these pronouns. Now, there's a reason for that. Sports fans feel an emotional investment in the teams they support and a connection to something bigger than themselves. Leon Davis, a lecturer in sport management at the University of Northampton, explains to us that football fandom is a form of leisure where people can pursue joyfulness and a sense of belonging. Now, understanding this, it's not really hard to understand why a fan might use grammar to include themselves into a higher identity. And this doesn't go for football, just football. It can go for any sports. Any sport, excuse me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I will be discussing today. My name is Steele Porter, and this is Who This Week, an analysis of sports fans' use of inclusive grammar on Twitter. Now, Twitter is a unique place to analyze grammar because on one hand, you can have a well-composed, thought-out, proofread tweet, and on the other hand, you can have an impulsive and reactive tweet to something that you might see or hear, like a sporting event. So, on Twitter, I decided to look at tweets that were during the live performance of sports teams. A couple examples of tweets I was looking for were tweets as such. First tweet on the left says, "Let's go, hashtag one for all, hashtag all in 216. We gonna win it again." This was during the Cavs home opener against the Knicks. This person obviously had nothing to do with the Cavs championship run or the game that's going on, but it sounds normal. And the one on the right is talking about the Ohio State game at Happy Valley for the Penn State game. Our offensive production looks way too similar to what we saw against Michigan State last year. Really conservative right now. Our, again, is using inclusive grammar, and obviously this person is not affecting the Buckeye offense. And if you notice in that second tweet on the right, it does also have another first person plural pronoun right there where it says, similar to what we saw. That is the correct use of the pronoun because it is referring to the fan base and the general viewers that saw that game last year. Also, another thing to notice about these two tweets is that they both use inclusive grammar. However, one has a more positive and excited feeling to it, which is the one on the left, and the other one is more negative and concerned, maybe even frustrated. And that is based on the success of the team, which leads to the question, can team success affect how a person uses inclusive grammar to talk about their favorite sports teams? Now, Robert Cialdini is the Regents Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Marketing at Arizona State University and is the father of the study. In 1976, he published one of his most, I'd say famous, credible studies, Basking in Reflected Glory. To bask in reflected glory is to associate oneself with a successful other or successful identity. The opposite of this is called cutting off reflected failure, which is to cut ties and disassociate oneself with others that we appear unsuccessful. To this day, his work is still the most influential sport consumer behavior study of all time, which is why I call him the father of the study. He is still referenced and used repeatedly in studies today from people in psychology, sport management, and so on. However, this study was 40 years ago, and it was also about how students dressed and how they wore team gear after a victory and how they used inclusive grammar after a victory in face-to-face communication. I believe that Twitter is a bit different from face-to-face communication. I believe that Twitter is a place where people tend to let loose and get their emotions out and maybe say a couple of new things to feel comforted by a couple of likes. So that's where my thesis comes from. Sports fans on Twitter use inclusive grammar more when their team is unsuccessful. Now, this isn't that I necessarily disagree with what Cialdini had to say, but I feel that Twitter is different in the sense that it still aligns with what he had to say, but it's a variation of his own study. Now, when gathering my data on Twitter, I was looking for tweets that use inclusive grammar. And also, I ended up breaking that down into 4 categories. There's inclusive and successful, inclusive and unsuccessful, non-inclusive and successful, and finally non-inclusive and unsuccessful. Inclusive and uninclusive refer to if the person was using inclusive grammar or not, such as we, us, our, as opposed to they, or naming the team name, like the Buckeyes or the Cavs or such. And successful and unsuccessful refers to how the team was performing at the moment of the tweet. So, start, we have, that's how we start, hashtag Go Bucks. We uses inclusive grammar, and hashtag Go Bucks is indicated that it's a positive tweet, showing that it is inclusive and successful. The next tweet says, our O-line played terrible. Our is using inclusive grammar, and terrible refers to an unsuccessful moment. This was during the Buckeyes game, again, against Penn State, when they struggled mightily. Next tweet says, a few years back, the Royals lost their first World Series and came back the next year to win it all. The Indians will do the same. The Indians is non-inclusive, and the tweet overall is a positive tweet. It is very inspiring. The Indians had a very successful season, so it is non-inclusive and successful. And our final tweet, Cavs need to wake the hell up. Cavs meaning non-inclusive and wake the hell up. Obviously unsuccessful. So after breaking the categories down breaking the data down into these 4 categories, data that I gathered from that would suggest that my thesis has some ground to stand on. An overwhelming 68% of the tweets in total were from unsuccessful events. This helps my general claim that people might use Twitter to vent and say negative things. Also, 56% of the tweets were inclusive, and 44%, 56 was inclusive, and 44% was non-inclusive, so it's about even for if the tweet was using the inclusive grammar. However, of the 56 inclusive tweets that I gathered, 36 of them were from unsuccessful events, which is the largest category of the 4 that I found, which in general will help prove my thesis that sports fans on Twitter will use inclusive grammar more when the team's unsuccessful. Now, this strays away from Cialdini's original findings that we will bask in reflected glory or use inclusive grammar more when our team is successful. However, there are different theories and ideas that do not necessarily agree with this. You know he was going to be there. Anyways, in 1990, Kansas University psychology professors Daniel Wan and Nyla Branscombe conducted a study on the effects of team identification. In this study, they conclude that fans of higher identification that associate themselves personally with inclusive grammar, they cannot cut off the reflective failure of their team because they view their allegiance to their favorite team as part of their identity. And in short, we feel, again, that connection to a cause greater than ourselves and a higher identity where we can't just put it away when things don't go our way because that's part of who we are. So, in conclusion, the sample data is short. However, I hope that it enlightens the idea that sports fans might talk differently about their favorite teams on a platform like Twitter than they would in real life. And that the use of inclusive grammar might not necessarily be correct when a fan uses it to talk about their team, but it's so right because that's who we are. Thank you.